I'm Jazzy Mitchell, and I'm here today with CJ Murphy. How are you, CJ?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. I'm thrilled to spend time with you today and hear about your newest project. So I'd love to just have you read an excerpt for us. You can set up the scene for us, tell us what story it's from, and let's hear it. I'm excited.
Okay. I know she wanted to start my recording, but I have to look and see where that's at. I don't have a button for that. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to set you up with House of Refuge, which is the next book that is coming out. It should be coming out in January 2023. And this one goes back to the characters that I had in book 3, Redemption's Road, which was pastors Rebecca and Naomi Declan. And they are non-denominational pastors that sort of have a rock and roll background. But they are also, at least Rebecca is from a religion that didn't celebrate Christmas. And so, Christmas has become a little important to her and her family. So, and given the fact that some of this is, came out of my own childhood and how I feel about things, Christmas is just, I'm a big kid. That's the way it is. So I'm going to do a Christmas scene for you that is from Christmas Eve. So they will actually be at the church, and then it will move after church on that end of it. Merry Christmas, everyone. If you'll find a seat, we'll get started. Rebecca strummed through the holly and the ivy, while everyone not already sitting down found a comfortable spot. Naomi took her place at the keyboard near her. On this night, Mary and Joseph were desperately seeking shelter. The town of Bethlehem was full of travelers as the Romans were taking a census and forcing everyone to report their familial city. There was a nefarious reason for this order, highlighting the miracle of the baby's survival to become the cornerstone of the new covenant. The child, the promised Messiah, would be born and laid in a manger. This innocent baby became the greatest Christmas gift ever. Amanda bathed the center stage where Rebecca stood in a bluish glow while shading the audience. Rebecca could detect movement in the back as a shadow crept along the wall. She moved her hand into position on the neck of her Martin guitar and began an intricately beautiful version of What Child Is This? Naomi began to harmonize, and together they let their voices join in perfect harmony, the notes effortlessly floating into the audience. She and Naomi were so in tune with each other, instinctively knowing how to play off the melody until the final chord finished. The audience was silent for a moment before breaking out into applause. Hunter stood exuberantly and stomped his feet. He feels the music. Her sermon was intentionally brief, centering on promises made for the salvation of all, and that no one was exempt because of who they were or who they loved. All are precious in the eyes of God. She took a deep breath and centered her thoughts. In Romans, it says, accept one another, then just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praises to God. She reminded him of grace equally measured for all humankind. As a congregation, they sang the first Noel together, followed by more Christmas songs. Julia Gerard, Hunter's educational aide, had come in a little later than everyone else and now joined Hunter at the edge of the stage. His eyes were bright and shining. He nearly vibrated with excitement. Rebecca stepped over to him as Naomi read the passages from Luke that detailed Jesus' birth and the gathering of the shepherds to witness the prophesied miracle. Not being fluent in sign language, Rebecca enlisted Julia to translate. Are you ready? Hunter's head bobbed up and down. It made her chuckle and reminded her of the Marvin the Martian's bobblehead she owned. His hands made the sign for yes. She smiled and held her hand out to him as she walked to the center stage. We have a special treat for you. Hunter's been working with Julia on something very special for his family and everyone else. Rebecca played a few bars from In the Bleak Midwinter, allowing the simpleness of the refrain to resonate with those in attendance. Rebecca sang the lyrics until they reached the final verse. She nodded to Hunter. The small boy raised his hands and mimicked Julia in signing a simple version of the words often sung by a child. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring him a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? Give him my heart. She looked out into the audience and watched as Jax clung tightly to Chance. Hunter's hand signed the word for heart, drawing the easily recognized shape in front of him. Rebecca began to cry with joy as the audience raised their hands and waved them back and forth in the deft clap, something Hunter had taught them all. She joined in and knelt beside him. His face was glowing with pride as she held out her fist to him. They bumped them together and pulled back in their hands as if there'd been an explosion. He stepped forward and hugged her before jumping off the stage and running straight to the two women who had their arms out to him. Chance and Jax are no less his parents than if he'd been born to them. Naomi stepped to her side and put an arm around her. Christmas miracles. Rebecca wrapped her in a hug. Miracles indeed. Small electric candles were passed out as everyone put on their coats. As a congregation, they went outside to the courtyard where the giant Jesus stood projected against the brick wall. Snowflakes as large as she could remember fell gently from the darkened sky as they stood in the crisp air. Each person interlocked their arms and they formed a circle. Rebecca calmed her beating heart as Naomi began the carol that needed no instrumental accompaniment, only in the sound of clear and reverent voices in the night. Naomi turned the bulb on her candle to light it. All around the circles, individuals lit their candles as they sang the lines from Silent Night. The candles shone brightly and illuminated the faces of those gathered. Outside the courtyard, a crowd stopped on the sidewalk to listen, as Naomi carried the melody and Rebecca added the harmony. The many voices blended to lift up an a cappella version of one of the most beautiful Christmas carols ever written. The final lines rang out, and Naomi and Rebecca allowed the power and the harmony of their two voices to rise above the rest. When they finished, the crowd that had surrounded them clapped in appreciation. Rebecca waved to them. Please join us for our final song of the night as we sing Joy to the World and ring in the birth of the Christ child. Many of them did just that. Another Christmas miracle came to be as black and white, gay and straight, joined as one in the spirit of Christmas. The next day, Christmas morning, Rebecca yawned and grabbed 2 cups of coffee from the tray Saban held. Naomi was nestled between her legs, laying up against her chest as they lay on the floor. You are a godsend. Sounds like you had a long night as well. We didn't leave Beander's until almost 3. For the first time in a year, I didn't regret having my flat in Elkins. Siobhan handed Ellie a cup and sat down beside her. For the next hour, they exchanged gifts, munched on Christmas cookies, and shared memories of their favorite Christmases. Rebecca looked at Ellie. Do you remember our first Christmas in Pittsburgh? We played some Christmas party, if I remember. Ellie entwined her fingers with Siobhan. That was the year after we left home. Some little cocktail lounge, but I don't think it's there anymore. We were taking any gig that we could get. Anyway, she moved the wrapping paper that covered her lap and sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at the Christmas tree by the window seat. The place had an attached motel, one of those little places that you really didn't stay in unless you had to. We were living off ramen noodles, day-old bread, and the thing I won't ever mention or eat again. We did eat a lot of peanut butter in those days. Rebecca shivered. There was this little thrift store we went in a few days before we played, and you found this tiny ceramic Christmas tree with bulbs that lit up when you plugged it in. Ellie scratched at her neck where the surgeons had removed her tumor last year. I remember. Rebecca turned to Siobhan. I'm sure Ellie told you we didn't celebrate as kids, so we constantly looked over our shoulder whenever we'd break some rule that fell into forbidden territory. We were about as dirt poor as we could be, but Ellie was determined that we were going to buy that little tree. It was only a couple of bucks, so I gave in. We got to the room that night, and she plugged it in before we'd even brought in our suitcases. It was the cleanest thing in the rooms. Ellie flayed it off, and Rebecca filled in the rest. We'd always heard from everyone that Christmas was a time of peace and joy, the two things we sadly lacked our entire childhood. Something warmed inside of me when she plugged that tree in, and I could see it in her too. Something about the promise of Christmas resonating with us. Naomi kissed her temple. You were making decisions for yourselves, a present of choices that you gave each other. Ellie nodded. I think you're right, Naomi. Our whole life was lockstep obedience to someone else's choices. This was one of our own making. She was silent for a few seconds. I still have it, you know. Rebecca felt her heart leap a little. You do? How in the world did it survive all these years? Ellie smiled. It was the first Christmas gift we ever gave ourselves. Naomi wrapped her in a hug. Some things are worth protecting. Rebecca looked around the room scattered with presents. New guitar strings, vintage t-shirts, and a pair of Chucks were piled up with other gifts. She pulled Naomi closer. The best gift doesn't come with ribbons and bows. It's being with the people you love. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, CJ. I love that. Love that the first scene with that heartwarming sense of community, how they all came together and for the holiday. That was wonderful. And then the next day, Christmas Day, that sense of intimacy and togetherness and overcoming things that might have been more painful in the past in order to really celebrate the holiday. That's really great. I can't wait to read your story once it comes out in the new year. Thank
you very much.
And we are going to have our next writer, Franci McMahon, join us in a moment. Franci has her newest project to read from today, too. And also, I didn't mention it before, so let me mention it now. If anyone's watching live and they'd like to submit a question or a comment, please do so wherever you're watching this now. And that way we can go ahead and relate it to the authors. Hello, Franci. How are you?
I'm good. However, just a minor correction. I never call myself Franci, but only Frankie.
Frankie, thank you so much. I'm glad you corrected me. I don't want to say it incorrectly. So thank you, Frankie. And so today I'd like you to go ahead and tell us about the story you're reading from, set up the scene, and then let's hear it.
All right. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for everyone who's watching. I really am happy you're out there in the audience. This is a story about a young woman growing up in an alcoholic family. And it's probably one of my most autobiographical books I've written. But all of my books have horses in them connected to some element that relates to them. But so first, I want to say a word about triggers, because for many of us, alcohol was a damaging aspect in our families. For me, it certainly was. And so my motivation for writing the book was to speak out about healing and the sometimes crazy ways we try to make a safe haven. My breaking my family secret is my gift to you. Right Into the Storm takes place in Montana. And the story is about Kate, a young woman dealing with the storm of her father's alcoholism, the storm of his fixing horse races, and her storm of attraction to Shogun, the two-spirit Blackfoot jockey who works at the ranch. Shogun is seen as male, but describes herself as a woman-bodied man. And the scene is between Kate and her Aunt Trudy. There's an element of suspense that runs through the whole book, that Kate and Shogun are trying to discover what is the leverage used to make her father fix horse races. So, do you want me just to launch into reading? Is that it? All right, I will then. So, mid-morning after chores, I came into the kitchen to find that Aunt Trudy had set out a snack for me. For some unknown reason, this brought tears to my eyes. I wiped them off when Aunt Trudy came in from outside to wash her hands. Those Shasta daisies are blooming like crazy, said Aunt Trudy as she trimmed a small bouquet. What's on the agenda today? Dad is mowing that irrigated 70 acres to the south. Shogun is out with a new filly here for schooling, and I need to handle the horses here for training. Want some help with them? You bet. Having help from Aunt Trudy would make it all easier. I didn't have to explain everything to her. I hooked the restless 2-year-old colt to the cross ties, and soon he relaxed to the soft brush and gentle handling. I enjoyed being with Aunt Trudy and trusted her in the same way the colt was growing to trust us. I had a rising need to confide in her. Aunt Trudy, I need to talk about something, but you have to promise me that you won't tell anyone. We held each other's gaze across the back of the horse. I can do that. What's on your mind? I stroked the horse with a brush a few times. I'm having feelings for Shogun. Well, that's not surprising. He's very handsome. That is the problem. Shogun is really a woman. I've known for a while, but she just told Dad yesterday. Really? Aunt Trudy paused, smiling softly. Well, that does complicate things. Is she transitioning? What do you mean? Oh, I digested that for a moment before answering. She calls herself Two-Spirit, but no, I don't think she has any intention of changing her body into that of a man. Attitudes are changing all over the place. I let out a held breath. I'll say, I've never had feelings like this before. Does this make me, queer? Try not to judge yourself. Does Shogun feel the same? I don't know. I'm such a mess. Honey, who we love isn't something we can control. Give yourself time and be kind to yourself. Relief flooded me. I just had to tell someone. Yes, Aunt Trudy's eyes held compassion and warmth. I understand. It's difficult being different in ranch country. Well, really any rural part of the country. It's as though everyone wants to raise sheep, not children. Aunt Trudy placed the brush down and said, when I was a kid, I wrote poetry. Not the hearts and flowers sort that people expected from a girl, but about the raw life I saw. Once I wrote about a deer that got caught at a fence by its front feet while trying to jump over, about what was left hanging on the wire once. I lost my place. Hold on just a minute. Oh, here we go. Once I wrote about a deer that got caught in a fence by its front feet while trying to jump over, about what was left hanging on the wire once the coyotes and birds were through. That's what made it into words. Aunt Trudy, I didn't know you wrote poetry. Can I read it sometime? Sure. The truth is, I polished that poem, and with the encouragement of my high school English teacher, I sent it to the New Yorker. A small smile lit her face. They took it. That is crazy wonderful. Yes, that was a long time ago. People, when they tell stories, often have a message. I rolled my eyes and groaned, but I played along. Aunt Trudy smiled at me. Here's the message. If I had listened to others, I'd have stuck with a little sweet flowers and puppy dog poems. But I wrote about what I know, where my heart led me, and that was deeply satisfying. To find yourself. I felt so much lighter. Secrets were so heavy. Sweet relief made my whole body tingle with the realization that I was normal, that I could love someone the same as everyone else. For the last few years, I've been bored while listening to my girlfriends talk about boys, and at times I even wondered what was wrong with me. Now all their talk made sense. I understood why I couldn't stop smiling. I had a spring in my walk, and I couldn't stop looking at Shogun, even when she was doing something as simple as brushing a horse. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you, Frankie. I really admire how you've tackled some of these strong and very complex topics like alcoholism and two-spirit, and not allowing yourself to be categorized within these pretty little boxes, instead remaining true to yourself and just going wherever that road leads. So I really enjoyed that. And I know many people are looking forward to this new book that's coming out in 2023. So thank you. So what I'd like to do now is to go ahead and ask some questions to both of our authors. I think I'm going to start out with CJ, if you're ready for it. Since your book is part of a series, CJ, what's your process for deciding where to go with these characters?
Oh boy. Part of it is, where your imagination takes you. In the rest of the series, my characters are all sort of law enforcement based or some kind of emergency service based. So there's always an element of some kind of drama, some sort of suspense, action adventure type thing. And those are, believe it or not, those are the easiest scenes to write for me, because having done that myself for almost 30 years, I write from experience on that. When you go into a lot of the other parts of it, when you're trying to develop relationships and all those things with different types of people, not just, somebody who's a mirror of myself, you have to listen to what the character tells you. And sometimes, you'll try to force the character to go one way, and then the character will either stop talking to you or just sort of in a way show you, this is not where I really need to go. So I think that's part of it. And you have to be able to leave enough intrigue in the book before to be able to bring you into the next book. So you leave enough unanswered questions that, bring somebody back. And, there's been a book in between book 3, and you had book 4. Now I'm going to do book 5. So book 3 and book 5, those characters are the same. So you've had an entire book where you've not focused on them. So I think that is the other thing, is you try to, you have main characters, secondary characters sometimes that you bring out and, put into a main character role. And so I just kind of let them talk to me and figure out where they want to go. Even though for the series, I had a basic outline that said, in this book, I want to handle this book, I want to handle this. So I know where, the next book is going to go, but I don't know what that book is about. I just know the things that I want to handle in that next book.
Excellent. And how much do you rely on your readers' knowledge of the previous books from the series? And what extent do you recap or refer to past events in the book that you're writing now, or that's coming out next?
Well, I actually had a really interesting suggestion from one of my betas, because there are so many characters in my books. When you're working with the sheriff's department, there are other people in the sheriff's department, and you've got other people within the family and other people on that. And readers are very astute. They, they remember the quirks of a character. They remember that, that Rebecca doesn't like peanut butter, or they will remember that, Chance doesn't eat soup, and you have to be really careful. So when I did this book, one of my betas said, hey, it'd be really good if you did a character index for us. And I think back to, some of the other books that I've read where there's been multiple characters in there that you needed to remember a few things. So that's what I did for this one. So in House of Refuge, there'll be a couple of pages worth of a character index that just reminds you who Hunter is, who Jax is, who Chance is, and some of the secondary characters, so that, they can try to keep them straight. Because if not, especially in a series, you might not mention a character for 2 books. And then all of a sudden that character pops back up in book 3 or book 4. And they're like, I don't remember that character. So that's where I'm going with it this time, is to try to do a character index. And that's why it's really good to keep extremely good character notes. I have a character Bible in an Excel sheet that's, each book has its own. And if I bring in a new character, I always make sure that I refer back to make sure that I'm not duplicating something. Even the hair color, eye color, what their quirks are, all of those things. Because if not, the readers, they will call you out on it. They're very astute.
Yeah, that's a great idea to keep a character Bible for your series. Absolutely. Because those little quirks are what draw people in and have them remember that characters, those little quirks like not liking the peanut butter or soup or whatever. And if you drop that later on or do something that conflicts with it, yeah, they're not going to be too happy with it. Thank you, CJ. Frankie, welcome to DPP, first of all. We're glad to have you as part of our family. Tell us about the types of books you write about. I know you said you write about horses, and but more than that, how do you prepare for each book and use the knowledge that you have when you're writing your books?
Well, I've grown up with horses and ranching, and my big sport was doing 30-mile long-distance horse races. So horses are central to my whole life. And I wanted to write about women and horses, but I also wanted to write about subjects that have some meaning to them, some power. One of my books was about internalized homophobia, how that can be poisoning. Another was about the criminal underbelly of the horse show world. And this one is about fixing horse races and what motivates that and how alcohol affects the family. So, and self-discovery. I think that's, but I like a lot of suspense. So to me, there needs to be something happening in a book because it is, after all, a story.
So you had mentioned that you grew up with horses, and that the new book that you just read from, that it was autobiographical to some extent. So I can see you incorporate a lot of your own experiences and knowledge to these books. Do you plan on writing more horse books, or would you think about writing books that don't have horses in them, or is that your niche and where you want to help spread the word about these harder subject matter that you delve into?
Well, in the first place, I don't think of them as horse books.
Right. Okay. Please correct me. Go ahead.
Someone had a dog in their book. We do call it a dog story. So
there's more than one horse in your book, but go ahead.
Yeah, there will probably always be a horse in all of my books.
Right.
Because I cannot imagine living without them, although I now do live without them, but they're still in my head. So the next book, which is almost finished, actually, is central about, has a horse as a central concept. It's about a beauty queen who is going to entertain troops in Alaska as part of her contract with the prize. And this is 1943. So she's on an airplane with a Canadian Mountie and his horse. And I won't say anything more about it, but I wondered what would happen if a beauty queen had to depend on an animal that she knew nothing about. And
interesting concept.
So, horse stories.
I wasn't trying to diminish what you write about, Frankie.
Well, people do think of, girls and horses as Arrested Development. This is a big, long time thing that I got all my life. But
well, I'm sorry I triggered you. No, we know.
Actually.
Good. So let's talk about, this is a question for both of you then. How has the writing process changed from the first manuscript that you brought from submission to publication to nowadays, when you bring a manuscript from submission to publication? How's that changed over time for you both? CJ, you want to talk to us about that?
Well, the one thing that hasn't changed is every time I write one, I think it's garbage. And I think the majority of us as authors, we are our own greatest critics, in the sense of, that we really, when we're done with the book, we're like, man, nobody's going to like this. Nobody's going to, want it. And my editor, CK, she always tells me, you worry too much. You worry too much. You don't write garbage. But I will say that my process has changed, because the very first book, I didn't have any idea what I was doing initially. I mean, I wrote a story. There were so many things that I didn't realize. You don't know what you don't know until you do it. And then somebody says, hey, you need to do this differently. So, I found a great mentor, another one of Desert Palm Press's writers, AJ Adair, who, mentored me along. And she told me, hey, you want to do this, you don't want to do this, you want to. And so over time, and she didn't rewrite the book for me. That was the other thing. She didn't say, I'm going to show you how to do this. She would rewrite one of these sentences, and then she would say, you're on your own now. And so then I would have to go back. So I think confidence level, once you get your first novel out and somebody accepts it, and then you start seeing that first few reviews come back and says, hey, was well worth, the money that I paid for it, then your confidence as a writer increases. And so then over time, you start to pick up to where the mistakes that you made in the initial, and I'm going to go old school here for a second. When I was typing a manuscript and there were, 2 spaces after a period, that was typing class. And I, drove everybody crazy for a long time. And they're like, we need to fix this in your manuscripts. And then they showed me how to do that. And then over time that changed. So I think for me, it was just a process of growth on how I do a manuscript now. Lee does a great job with making sure that we have templates so that we don't have to, a lot of the technical side of it, we don't have to worry about as much. Here's the manuscript, just right within that. And here's, what your fonts need to be. But when it comes to style and when it comes to writing, I think we get more fluid over time. I think we have the ability to carry our characters better and flesh those out in comparison to the very beginning, when I think we're really pretty timid when we begin to write. But now, I think it's just a little easier for me on that side.
Great. So what I'm hearing is that with experience and working with your editors and mentors, that you're able to become more comfortable with your own talent and how to express that. Yeah, that's a great process. And how about you, Frankie? How has the process changed for you from submitting the manuscript to publication over the years for you?
Well, for one thing, you pay a whole lot less postage because we used to mail out the manuscripts with a return cover. And now you just shoot it off on email. It's fabulous. I was one of those rare people who decided where I wanted to send my first manuscript, and that was 30 years ago. And I sent it to them, and they took it. So I never got a rejection on that first book. And so what I actually had to learn was how to accept rejection. So having the success of that first book so strongly. So I'm totally self-taught, and probably go about it in very, non-traditional ways. I don't plot out things. I don't have a character guide or anything else. I'm totally seat of the pants. So
yeah, many writers
right with you.
Yeah, a lot of writers are like that, or some they plot everything out and then just ignore them afterwards. So I think writers have their different ways of fleshing out their stories. But
one thing I like to do, I don't like to have anyone read it until I've typed the end. Because I think that a story can be influenced very strongly by the response of the beta readers. But I really value beta readers. But I want to write my story first and then find out what their take is on it.
Right. So you like to basically delve into your story yourself and flesh it out before anyone else has input or reactions to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
I can understand that. It's your baby while you're working on it, right? You don't want anyone else influencing that at all. It's yours. I can understand that.
when other readers read something, they sort of put it into their own voice. So if they make comments, I kind of didn't have a chance to read that, but they
We'll
make
put it back.
comments based on how they would write the story.
Mhm.
And that's the danger of showing other authors your work.
Mhm.
So I just think we need to be very self-protective about who reads it, what we're
Yeah.
looking for.
Hmm. I think it'd be very easy for someone who reads it for you to trip into taking away your voice in different instances. It's pretty easy because, you're just trying to help. And I have several authors who read my manuscripts before I send it over to the publisher. And you're right. Sometimes they're trying to help me, but it will lose the track of what I'm trying to get through there. What the theme is, or with the voice or the emotion. So I can understand that entirely. Sometimes you really have to be protective, as you said, of your manuscript and of your view of how you want to reflect that off of the page. So that's
Yes, and you
great.
don't normally want everything translated into correct English.
Hmm.
Sometimes you want just more character, your own voice to
Hmm.
come through strongly.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I saw there was a comment that came in, CJ, someone who hadn't heard your writings before, but is interested and want to know what was the name of the first book of the series.
The series itself is called the 5-Point series. And so the first book in that series is Gold Star Chance. The second book in that series is Forever Chance. Third book in the series is Redemption's Road. Fourth book in the series was Sovereign Chance. And then this book will be House of Refuge.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So let me ask both of you, what themes or tropes do you like to explore through your books? And give me an example from the excerpt you read today. Now, I know that you might have touched upon it already, but let's just simplify it a little bit for those who are listening today and go ahead and talk about those again. The themes or tropes that you like to explore through your books and an example of that from today's reading. Frankie, why don't you go first?
I actually do not understand what the word trope means. I mean, it's a word that's used a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
what does it mean? It
What does it
means
mean? Well, something like age gap or fake romance or enemies to lovers. Tropes are
yeah.
basically
I
different.
don't like any of that.
Yeah,
Personally,
yeah.
I don't
It
want
could
to.
be.
That's
It
almost
could
a
be.
formula.
Well,
What?
but it's not because people write it differently. It's something that people like, though. Ice Queen is another example. For your book, maybe I would say it's not being put in a box or not defining people, or being true to
Right.
yourself. Those could be tropes. But how about, why don't we talk about themes then? What kind of themes do you talk about in this book, or what is it that you are showing for the character arc in your book?
Well, she starts out uh, making excuses for her father, totally in denial, but at the same time struggling with it and knowing that personally it's hard for her, and she sees how it's tearing her family apart.
Mhm.
Um, and yet she loves her father. He's
Mhm.
been the one who taught her about horses. And um, so she does these kind of um, compulsive behaviors, tapping things a certain number of times to try to control her surroundings. But it's like you can't control chaos. So um, her growth through the book is also linked to the discovery of what the pressure on her father was.
Mhm.
So um, at the end of the book, she's um, much more knowledgeable about herself and about the realities of what her father is able to do. And so it's just it's a process. The whole book is a process.
Right, right. And I think that's a great theme, really. Part of it, of her learning not to have control over everything and finding a way to be okay with that. That's a
Well,
great theme.
actually, part of the reason that Shogun is in the book is there's a point there where Shogun explains to Kate that using magic, basically trying to control your surroundings by tapping something a certain number of times, is a way to try to make order out of chaos. And so that begins to make sense to Kate.
Mm-hmm.
And that this kind of magic frame, it helps her put it in perspective.
Thank you. CJ, you're on the hot seat now. What themes or tropes do you like to explore through your books? And give an example from the excerpt you read today.
Probably, and let me explain that partly in this series, that the book number 3 and this book deal with a different set of characters. So there's a little bit of a different theme that runs through that part in comparison to the rest of the series. The rest of the series is law enforcement based. So if you want to talk about tropes, you're talking about cops and docs, on that end of it, to where, you have the law enforcement side of it. There's a medical side of it, even though she's a vet at this point. But there are some of those that are in there. But then, with Rebecca and Naomi on the particular set of the series that I'm working with them, it's a lot of, if you want to say, religious trauma, as well as some family trauma, that comes from, they come from Rebecca and her sister Ellie come from a pretty abusive childhood, that's surrounded by a lot of religious trauma that was used as an excuse for a lot of that abuse. And so, for those, that's kind of a theme that runs through this, and how they don't necessarily have blood family outside of each other. It's more of a family of choice that they've made around each other and with their friends and, the people that are family to them, the community that they've made into a family, and how they've, shown a different side of religion in comparison to what they grew up with. They did not want it to be, they wanted other people to find what they find, to find that grace, in comparison to what that they were always being told they were not worthy enough. So those are the kind of things that fall within the books that I've been writing in this series. Like I said, it's an action adventure kind of mashup. There's some romance in it too, but it still falls into, if it's going to fall into a category, it's going to be that cops and docs thing.
Yeah, and many people love the cops and docs, but also the themes that you're introducing and exploring. Many readers can certainly relate to, and so they can join that journey and see how they're able to adapt and grow from it. So that's great. And I know you have many readers who are waiting, for your next book to come out, that they've been waiting.
This has been 2 years in the process, because I had a severe case of writer's block, between COVID and changing jobs and several things. Just every time I sat down to try and, bring these characters, to the end of the book, I just couldn't get there. And so then, there came a point where I was able to break through it. And, so for 2 years, everybody's been saying, hey, when's the next Chance and Jack's coming out? When's the next Rebecca and Naomi coming out? And, that's hard when you're an author who loves to write, but you can't write. And, there's a blockage, whether it's creatively, whether it's, pressures and all those things. That's hard to overcome. And, you don't want to disappoint people. You want to give them what they want, what, the reason that they, enjoy your books. It gives them an escape from something. And if you can't provide that, they go looking for something else. And I'm always grateful that there are fantastic authors everywhere. So that, it's not just on one of us. Can you imagine if there was only one writer everywhere and everybody was waiting for just that book to come out? But, that's been tough for me, to try and get past that blockage. So I'm grateful that, I was able to do that, and, that will be coming out, and, then everybody will be asking, when's the next one? 5 minutes after that book's out, when's the next one? Like, I haven't even started it yet.
Yeah, better start thinking.
Well, but the next book, I'm going to take a little time off, not necessarily from the series itself, but I want to write something else, that's kind of fun for me. So I'm going to try to dip into a little bit of a comedy. And so I've been working on that, when I really feel like writing it, but it has nothing to do with the series. So they're going to have to wait a little longer for that next book in the series.
Yeah. Well, that's good though, to mix it up a bit and to broaden that readership actually. And then they'll probably find your series and fall in love with that. So we have a few more minutes left. So yes, that is the hope. I'd like in the last few minutes we have to have you both tell us what you want us to know about the project you read from today. I know we've talked a lot about them, of course, but this is like the last words to leave with your readership on what you want them to know about your project. So we'll go ahead. Franci, why don't you go first?
Oh, I don't know what to say,
Well, go ahead and tell us again the title, when it will be out, topic, main characters.
Yeah, it'll be out March 7th. I just want to write something that I would want to read. And I read a great essay by Alice Walker years and years ago, which is what actually motivated me for writing. She said, write what you want to read. And so I wanted something with adventure and honesty and, I didn't want to write anything that had a predictable formula. And I actually took the risk of killing off one of my two main characters in one book. And I got a lot of flack for that.
I bet.
But it was part of the story. I tried writing that story a couple different ways, but that's how the story wanted to go. And so I think that's the most exciting thing, that that I like to write a good story. And I think people want to read stories that maybe surprise them a little bit.
Yeah, and I bet your readers appreciate your dedication to giving them a story that is so complex and has really interesting characters and brings them on a journey. CJ, tell us your last words about your story there that you want your readers to know.
Well, House of Refuge, like I said, is actually going to be the second book in, Rebecca and Naomi's story. And so I think probably from that, there's a quote by Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, that has to do, if you want to change the world, pick up your pen and write. And so for me, if I want people, representation matters. People need to see themselves in what they're reading or see something that means something to them. So for me, I lived a life of a lot of belief that I wasn't worthy enough. And I think that that's, my main message with this book is that, we're all given grace. We're all worthy of that grace, even when we've done some things that, maybe are not good. And where we find that grace and where we give that grace, I think that's what the main theme of this book is. And, like I said, if you want to change the world, you have to give it a chance, show somebody that there can be a different world. And that's, the theme in this book more than anything.
And that's a great message. And people need to read that and they need to hear it, especially when they're feeling doubts about what's going on in their own lives. If they can read through someone else's eyes, I think that really helps and goes a long way. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry to say we have run out of time. So I'd like to thank CJ and Franci for spending time with us today. I know I'm excited to read your books once they're out in print sometime in early 2023. And this is the last Desert Palm Press live stream for 2022. So thank you for rounding it out for us. For those watching, I hope that you'll come find us in 2023. We will have more coming up, of course. Until then, I urge you to visit desertpalmpress.com, the website for our publisher, where you can get 10% off of ebooks by using the code 10DPP. So happy holidays to all of you, and we'll see you next year.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.